Good Shabbos, everybody. Good to see everybody here in the room or here on the Zoom, or if you're live streaming, wherever you're coming from, you're in the right place, and we're glad to have you celebrate Shabbat with us here at Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center. And before we get started, a couple things. First, this strives to be a safe community, so we appreciate everybody following posted placards and things like that and keeping your mouth and your nose covered while you're in this space. And if you feel like you need a mask break at any point, you need to go outside and get some fresh air, you will not offend me if you choose to leave the service at any time. So if it's for your safety and your health, go right ahead. The other thing is this is not just a safe place, but a musical place. And we're going to be doing some singing up here, but I hope that we're not singing instead of you. We really want to sing to inspire you to sing with us. And if you're on mute out there, that's when I do some of my best singing. So please join in. Even if we can't hear you, we can feel you. And if you're in this room, I hope we can hear you too. So even if you don't know the words, you can just, I was humming to Shalom Aleichem earlier. If you just want to hum, that's okay too. If you catch the rhythm and you want to tap it out on your prayer book, that is just fine with me. So there's a psalm that we sing on Saturday mornings where in Psalm 150 it says, whatever instrument you have at your disposal is okay. It is kosher for praising God. And if you have nothing else, just your breath, just your voice, you can sing with your whole soul. So in just a moment, we're going to get started with a song that welcomes in these angels that we imagine join us for Shabbat. They come in, they bless us, they dwell with us in peace, and we see them on their way at the conclusion of Shabbat. But we're just getting started, so let's get started on page 13 with Shalom Aleichem. Ooh, ooh. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon. Mi melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bachuni leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedchem leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Barchuni l'hay ray 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 Tzedchem leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Just as we increase the sound in this space, we increase the light in our homes and in our hearts, and we have some Shabbat candles over here. They've already been lit, but they haven't had any blessings said around them yet. So I'm going to invite up, we had some early volunteers here. I believe Karen and Sam are going to come help us out. Come on up. Amen. Good job, Sam. I can always count on Sam for a thumbs up as long as I do a good job. Keeps me on my toes. So the part of the service that we're entering right now is called Kabbalat Shabbat, or receiving or welcoming Shabbat. And the sages of Sfat, I believe it was, who put this service together about 500-ish years ago, and they said, you can't just go right into Baruch like you might on a regular weeknight. We need to prepare. We need to sort of climb up out of the schmutz of the work week to get ready for Shabbat. And let's do that with a series of psalms and poems and songs. And we start with a psalm that's on page 15, Lehuna Ranana on page 15. Lehuna Ranana Ladonai Naria Letzo Ishenu Nekad Mafanav Metoda Bizmiro Naria Lo Kiel Gadol Adonai Umelech Gadol Kol Elohim Asher Arbaim Shana Hakut Badon Va'omar Am Toeh Levavhem V'hem lo yadu derachai asher nishbati v'apihim yivon el menuchati. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash, page 16, Shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai baruch hu shemo v'yamar b'shvato. Amru b'goyim Adonai malach, avti kon tevel b'nimon. Lifnei Adonai kiva lishpot haaretz, yishpot tevel betzedek ve'amim be'emunato. After a couple of psalms from our poet King David back in the day, the Kabbalists of Sfat put together this song of their own composition where they sort of personify Shabbat as a visiting dignitary. Shabbat comes in like a queen visiting your town, or perhaps like a bride walking down the aisle at a wedding, and is received in honor both as a transcendent ruler, but also as a beloved friend. And the song is Come, My Beloved, Lecha Dodi, on page 21, דודי לקראת כלה, יבביי, 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 פני שבת נקווה לך דודי לקראת כלה, יבביי, 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 פני שבת נקווה שמור וזכור בדיבורך השמיענו אל המיוחד אדוני אחד ושמו אחד לשמו לתפארת ולתהילה לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה כי מקור הברכה מראש מקדם נסוכה סוף מעשה במחשבה תהילה together לך דודי לקראת כלה, יבביי, 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 פני שבת נקווה לך דודי לקראת כלה, יבביי, 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 פני שבת נקווה מקדש מלך עיר מלוכה קומי צאי מתוך ההפכה רב לך שבט בעמך בכה והוא יחמום עלייך חמלה התנאי מעפר קומי לבשי בגדי תפארתך עמי על יד בן ישי בית הלחמי קורבה אל נפשי גאלה לך דודי לקראת כלה, יבביי, 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 פני שבת נקווה לך דודי לקראת כלה, יבביי, 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 פני שבת נקווה התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורי קומי אורי, אורי אורי, שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, יבביי, 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 פני שבת נקווה לך דודי לקראת כלה, יבביי, יבביי, ידדדדי, פני שבת נקווה. On page 22. לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת לקווה לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקווה לא תבושי ולא תקלמי מה תשתוכחי ומה תהמי בך יחסו עניי עמי ונבנתה עיר על תהילה והיו למשיסו שועשייך ורחקו כל מבלייך יסיס עלייך אלוהייך כבשוס התן על כלה לך דודי לקראת כלה Osmo Tifrotzi Veit Adonai Taritzi Ayarish Ben Patzi Venismecha Venagila. We rise together. Olecha Dodi Likrat Kala Penei Shabbat Dekabela. Olecha Dodi Likrat Kala Penei Shabbat Dekabela. Boy v'shalom hateret bala gam b'simcha u'b'tzola toch emunei am segula boi chala olecha dodi Kala Penei Shabbat Dekabela Olecha Dodi Likrat Kala Penei Shabbat Dekabela Olecha Dodi Likrat Kala Penei Shabbat Dekabela Olecha Dodi Likrat Kala Penei Shabbat Dekabela. You may be seated. We're going to continue on page 23. Page 23. There's a psalm just for Shabbat, and says, in fact, it says, Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat. And we just want to sing a song connected to the first couple of lines. It's good to acclaim Adonai, to sing your praise, exalted God, to affirm your love, your kindness each morning, and your faithfulness each night. Page 23. Tov lehodot l'Adonai, Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer le'shimcha elyon, Tov lehodot l'Adonai. One more time. Tov lehodot l'Adonai, Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer le'shimcha elyon, Tov lehodot l'Adonai, lehagid baboker chasdecha, lehagid baboker chasdecha, ve'emunatcha balelot, ve'emunatcha balelot, tov lehodot l'Adonai, lehagid baboker chasdecha, lehagid baboker chasdecha, ve'emunatcha balelot, ve'emunatcha balelot, tov lehodot l'Adonai, tov lehodot l'Adonai, tov lehodot l'Adonai, lezamer, o lezamer, לשמך העליון, טוב להודות. לאדוני. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. If you're just joining us, welcome to Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center. We're delighted to have you here to celebrate this Shabbat evening. Before we get started with Ma'ariv, our evening prayer service, I want to just pause to notice that we have opened up a new book of the Torah this week, and that is the book of Shemot, which is commonly connected to the name Exodus. In Hebrew, it's Shemot is names, because it starts with a genealogy, which helps sort of connect the dots. Is whenever there's kind of a time jump in the narrative of the Torah, they often will begin it with a genealogy connecting the story that happened before to the story that's about to come. And in this case, it's when last we left Torah, our friends Yaakov Avinu, I think he was just passing away, but his family had settled in Egypt because they had to. They were refugees from a crisis in climate and agriculture that had led to starvation in their promised land, and God said, it's okay, you can go live in Egypt for a little while if it saves the family's life. And we settled there, and we'd done quite well for ourselves. In fact, the book of Shemot begins talking about our prosperity, how we had grown from a family of 70 souls into a nation of, well, my best guess is about 2 million people or so. I don't know if anybody's actually tracked this down. Later on, I don't want to spoil it for you, but eventually we get out of Egypt. And they take a census of all males of military age and come up with a number of about 600,000. I figure, okay, if a lot of those folks are married, and then that's just people from age, say, 20 to 60, their partners, spouses, what have you, the younger people, the older people, everybody along for the ride. It's got to be at least a couple of million people. So we go from 70 to millions. What had started out as a family story becomes the story of a nation. And the scholar Nahama Leibovitz writes an introduction on the book of Shemot where she asks, okay, why Egypt? You know, why did we have to move from Canaan to Egypt, other than the obvious, other than the crop failure piece? What's the purpose of our dwelling in Egypt for as long as we did? You know, because we started out, we were fine for a while in Canaan, and then we had to leave, and we spend the rest of the Torah, we spend the next 4 books getting back to Canaan. So why do we need to be in Egypt? Why does God see fit to have us in this place? And before I share a couple of answers that Dr. Leibovitz points to in the Midrash, I want to notice that we're also closing a Gregorian calendar year. And not the best one. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say maybe this was hard for some people, for everybody I know, I think. It certainly was a challenging year for me personally and professionally, and humanly. And it's these kinds of, I mean, I know it's not the Jewish year, but nevertheless, because of the tenor of the environment we live in, I mean, it's a time where we take stock, but it's a time where we look back. And a lot of the looking back at this time is in mourning. It's about what we have lost in the last year. We just crossed the milestone in the United States of 800,000 dead in this pandemic, due to this pandemic. And it turns out, actually, there were more people who passed, I believe, from COVID-19 in 2021 than did in 2020 when it got started. And we're entering a grim time with a new variant promising to be even more dangerous, at least in numbers, if not effect, as it seems to be right now. It's natural to look backwards. It's natural to judge the past. And the question I want to ask that I think Exodus and Shemot is going to help us with is about looking forward. And that question is, through all of our tribulations, what new wisdom are we gaining now? Through all of our difficulty, what new grace is going to be unlocked? What new compassion? What enduring new morality? Because this is also the question of Shemot. This is the question of Mitzrayim. This is the question of why did we need to be in Egypt in the first place? And there are some midrashim in Shemot Rabbah, the great collection of midrash on this book, that seem to say that our time in Egypt was punitive. Right? At first, it was out of necessity. But why did we go from thriving in Egypt to suffering in Egypt? And there are those who say it was to punish us. There's a teaching that once Joseph died, many of the old traditions of Jewish life were ignored. And people were integrating into the population. There was somebody pointed this out to me that, when we started off in Egypt, we were in our own neighborhood. We had our own place. We had Goshen. And then if you read closely later on, when we have the 10th plague, when we have the Malach HaMashchit, this destroying force passing through Egypt, we have to mark our doors so that it passes us over. Well, why would we have to do that if we were in our own neighborhood? And they say that we were so, let's say, numerously prosperous. We saw such a population boom that we overran the borders of Goshen, and we were buying up, renting every spare inch of real estate we could find, and that's why we were totally integrated into the population spatially, and possibly assimilating culturally. And some midrashim seem to indicate that that's why we were punished the way we were. That's why we were brought into this situation called corvée or conscripted labor. It was a punishment because we had forgotten not just the promised land, but the promise associated with it. At the same time, there are other midrashim from Shemot Rabbah that say, no, it wasn't just a punishment. It wasn't merely punitive, although that might be a piece of it. It wasn't merely retrospective, but it was also prospective. It was also constructive. It was also educational for us. It was necessary to answer the call that God gave us to be a people chosen to prosper the world, chosen to repair the world, chosen to show the world what compassion could be about. And we know this because over and over again in the Torah, it gives us as a reason for commandments that we have because you remember your time in Egypt. A couple of times in Parashat Mishpatim, coming up, no spoilers, but we read it every year. V'ger lo toneh v'lo tilchatzenu, ki gerim ha'aytem be'eretz Mitzrayim. You are not to wrong or oppress a stranger because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Right? This is a rule given to us way after we leave. And later on in the same parsha, my personal favorite, V'ger lo tilchatz v'atem yadatem et nefesh hager ki gerim ha'aytem be'eretz Mitzrayim, says, almost exactly the same thing. What it adds, just to translate, do not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings, the heart of the stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The prior verse was about fairness. You were in this situation, don't put somebody else there. The Holy One adds, Vatem yadatem et nefesh hager. You know exactly what that's like. And we move from fairness to empathy. And not only here, even in Devarim, even in the book of Deuteronomy, even as Moses is giving his last swan song, his last enjoinder to the Hebrew people, you shall rejoice before the Lord. The stranger, the widow, and the fatherless, meaning when you rejoice, everybody is included. And remember that you were a slave in Egypt. This time we spent in a narrow place wasn't just to shame us for integration and assimilation. It was good that we were among the people. And we were there to learn what not to do in the future, but also what to do. Not to exclude, because we know that feeling. Open our arms to everyone, regardless of status, regardless of class or caste, because we know what it's like to be at the bottom. Mitzrayim, the Narrows, prepared us for a morality that transcended tribe and transcended status in ways that at least their world had never seen. That was what this exile was for. So as we look back on the year behind us, I barely remember any of it because it just felt like one, kick in the seat after the other. I said this week, thank God we've been open, because this time last year we weren't. And God knows what the future holds for us. But maybe this time was to prepare us for something better. Maybe knowing what it's like to be in a narrow place, a place where people put their freedoms ahead of their responsibilities, can help us bridge things that are broken. Maybe it helps us fix our broken system of distributing health care. Maybe it helps us bridge political divides. What would it be like to say, you shall not maintain your polity through ugly name-calling? And you know what that's like because you lived through the worst of it. You shall not underinvest in public health because you saw what happens when it breaks. It's a fitting time to mourn. It's a fitting time to count the losses. And yet, we can also ask, what new wisdom are we gaining now? What new grace? What new compassion? And what enduring new morality? Because we have lived through what we have lived through, what will those who live build because of it? Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for joining us here at PJTC. We're going to continue with Mariv, starting with our call to blessing the Baruch Hu on page 28. It's our custom to rise and face the ark for the Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam va'ed. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'dvarim. Borei yom v'layla. Umavir yom uvevi layla, umavdil beinu yom uvein layla, Adonai tzevot shemo. El chai v'kayam, tamid yimlok aleinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Hamari v'aravim. You may be seated as we continue on page 29. We bless God for illuminating our lives in the prior blessing. Now we bless God for the constancy of God's love. Ahavat olam. Page 29. Ahavat olam, Beit Yisrael, Amcha avta. Torah u'mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim, otanu limadeta. Al ken Adonai Eloheinu, b'shovenu kumenu, nasiach behukecha. ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם היינו ואורך ימינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה, יומם ולילה. ובתך תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. And continue the next passage at the bottom of page 30 at your own pace, and we'll get back together in just a moment. We're at the top of page 31, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor, Daber el bnei Yisrael, v'amarta alehem, v'asu lahem tzitzit, al kanfei vigdehem ledorotam, v'nanu al tzitzit hakanaf patil techelet, v'haya lachem letzitzit, uritem oto, uschartem et kol mitzvot Adonai, v'asitem otam, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניהם אשר אתם זונים אחריכם למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני Adonai Elohechem Emet Ve'amuna V'kol Zon. On page 32, page 32. We bless God for illuminating our lives and for the constancy of God's love. Here on page 32, we bless God as a redeemer. And we quote in just a moment the song at the sea, the song that our forebears sang out in spontaneous joy after crossing the split sea, saying, "Who is like our God among all who are worshipped? Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai." Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha neda b'kodesh nora, tehilot osef ele malchutecha Rahuvanecha bokei hayam lifnei Moshe zeli anu ve'amru zeli anu ve'amru Adonai imlok leolam va'ed Adonai imlok leolam va'ed. Together. Yididai-dai-dai. Yididai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yididai-dai. Yididai-dai-dai. Yididai-dai. Yididai-dai. ונאמר כי פרנה את יעקב, וגלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה, אדוני, גא ישראל. Page 33, Hashkivenu. Help us, Adonai, to lie down in peace and awaken us again, our sovereign, to life. Spread over us the shelter of your peace and guide us in your good counsel. Hashkivenu, Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom ve'hamidenu Malkeinu lechaim Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'hamidenu Shomreinu lechaim Ushmor tzeitenu Uvoenu Lechaim u'leshalom Me'ata ve'ad olam Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'hamidenu Malkeinu lechaim Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'hamidenu Shomreinu lechaim Shalom 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 Baruch atah Adonai Ha'poresikat shalom aleinu ועל כל עמו ישראל, ועל ירושלים. We're on page 34, page 34. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ביי 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 ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ וביום השביעי שבת וינפש. יתקרא ויתקרא שמי רבה במה דיברה קראתי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולם מעלמיה יתברך יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם וינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. We rise for the Amidah for Shabbat evening on page 35b. This is a silent or private Amidah, so take your time to pray the prayers of your heart and the prayers on the page, and when you're finished with your own prayers, you may be seated. We'll get back together in just a few moments. Ose shalom bimromav. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. We conclude the Amidah for Shabbat evening with Kaddish Shalem on page 48. Yikra v'yikra shemei Rabbah, Belma divra kirte v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon v'yimechon v'chayeduchol Beit Yisrael, b'agalav v'zman kari v'imaru, Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevorach, le'olam olal me'al maya yitbarach. Yitbarak v'yishtabak v'yipar v'yitramam b'naseh v'yitadar v'yitelei v'yitalal shmei dekudesha brichu le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechemata damiran b'yama v'imeru Amen. Tikabal tzor hon u'barhan d'chol Yisrael kodem avahon d'vishmaya v'imeru Amen. Yehei shlam rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imeru Amen. Oseh shalom bimromav Hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imeru. Amen. We begin to end our service with a prayer that reminds us that the world that we want to bring into being is our responsibility. It's on us, aleinu, on page 51. Page 51, we rise and face the ark for aleinu. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נותן שמיים ויוסר הארץ. אמת מלכנו ופסולתו ככתוב בתורתו ומעלנו מתחתנו על כן נקבל לך אדוני אלוהינו לראות מהרה ולקבול שמו וככתנו כי על מלכות שלך כי ולעולמי תמלוך בכבוד ככתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. You may be seated. Before we conclude the service, we always pause to remember with kavod, remember with honor those who are no longer with us. And here at PJTC, in the coming week, we are marking the Yartzeit, that is the anniversary of the passing of Abraham and Esther Middleman and their children, Bahija Brewert, Barbara Siegel, Benjamin Grable, Benjamin Saltman, David Taus, Edith Chesson, Esther Greenberg, Fanny Jempolsky, Goldie Frittis, Harvey Goldman, Henry Weinstein, Herbert Siegel, Herman Blumenfeld, Ida Leff, Irving Moses Glazer, Isidore Zwern, Israel Morgenstern, Jack Lewis, Jean Steingold, Joanne Berkeley, Joseph Gruber, Joseph Rosenblum, Larry Figner, Lester Stroh, Margit Groda, Mary Booker, Maurice Russo, Max Lifshitz, Milton Pepper, Minna Morris, Mira Salem, Molly Weinstock, Morris William Hillinger, Nancy Boughton, Nathan Rappaport, Norma Siegel Altschuler, Robert Zabin, Rose Hannah Jacobson, Ruth Kay, the sister-in-law of Ruth Kay, Sadie Rice, Sally Schwartz, Samuel Alt, Sarah Katzman, Selma Miriam Applebaum, Seymour Levine, Sophie Carno, Spencer Gilbert, Stephen Eagle, Teresa Friedman, Tilly Kaplan, Walter Schuster, and Yetta Weiner. If you have another name that you'd like to lift up in honor, please hold their name in your heart or say that name out loud wherever you are. And if you're in mourning for anyone or observing a yard site, please rise for the Mourner's Kaddish on page 52, page 52. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah Ba'alma Divra Kirute v'yamlich Malchute b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehe Shmei Rabba Mevorach le'olam ol'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitale v'yithalal Shmei dekudsha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru Amen. Yehe Shlama Rabba min Shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. I'll ask everyone to rise along with them, and we're all going to stand as we end this service just how we began, and that's in joyous song. And was it Odievo Shalom? It is. I like that song very much. Please sing it with us. And then make sure you stick around for Kiddush at the end of the service. Odievo Shalom Aleinu, Odievo Shalom Aleinu, Odievo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Odievo Shalom Aleinu, Odievo Shalom Aleinu, Odievo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Odievo Shalom Aleinu, Odievo Shalom Aleinu, Odievo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Odievo Shalom Aleinu, Odievo Shalom Aleinu, Odievo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Good Shabbos, everybody. Thank you for being here at PJTC. If you want to stick around for a second, we're going to make Kiddush up here on everybody's behalf, and then we might have some bread and some juice and stuff outside for you, maybe even some little treats. Oh, don't want to uncover the bread yet. That's indecent. Let's see, one more thing. Oh, yeah, we got some to wash hands with. Where's that? Okay, here we go. And if those of you at home, one real quick announcement before we do this, just because I'm going to forget otherwise. Because of the celestial alignment of Shabbat and the Rose Parade next week, I've been told that it's been our custom in the past to not necessarily have services if Shabbat coincides with New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. However, because we now have access to live streaming, that's exactly what we're going to do. So there will not be services in person in the building here next Friday night or Saturday morning, but we will be available on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, the whole Megillah, as it were. Even before Purim, we have the whole Megillah. So please, we will be here tomorrow in person, so join us then. But next week, we will be fully in the ether. So without further ado, let's make a little Kiddush. ויערב ויבוקר יום השישי, ויהולו השמיים והארץ וכל צבאם, ויהל אלוהים ביום השביעי מלאכתו אשר עשה, וישפוט ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה. ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי, ויקדש אותו, כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו אשר ברא אלוהים לעשות. צברי חברי. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו ורצבנו, ושבת קודשו ביבב רצון הנהילנו זיכרון למעשה בראשית, כי הוא יום תהילנו מקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים, כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנהלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. I'll do a little hand washing before motzi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Shabbat shalom.